Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Hi. Hi, Chris. Hello, Rose. And we're almost back. And here's Roberto. Okay. So, just to note, today will be our last session in this class. We're going to continue with the text that we've been looking at in a particular line of Hasidism, which hopefully will underscore for you some of the ways in which Hasidism has developed and changed and also has its own kind of inner tensions, right? And you'll see how those tensions express themselves. If you look at the change just between what we saw last week from the Seer of Lublin and the more ascetic kind of Judaism of the Yehudi HaKadosh, and then the more, should we say, relaxed version of Hasidism of Simcha Bunim. And now we come to a whole different variety of Hasidism, which is the Hasidism of the Kotzker Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, not to be confused with Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Menachem Mendel, pretty much a Hasidic name, but it goes back long before both of them. So after Simcha Bunim died, most of his followers became part of this camp of Rabbi Morgenstern, who moved to this little town of Kotsk, and so he became known as the Kotzker Rebbe. Right? And the Kotzker Rebbe had started out as a student of the Seer of Lublin, and then followed the Yehudi, and then Simcha Bunim. The main theme that you see going through the teachings of the Kotzker Rebbe and all the stories and the aphorisms for which he is famous is the passion for truth, which, by the way, was the title of Heschel's book about the Kotzker Rebbe and the Danish pastor Søren Kierkegaard, right? Passion for truth, right? Well, remember the Baal Shem Tov emphasized love for every Jew, serving God with joy, finding God in all things. Kotzker Rebbe says, well, if you're not being authentic, then all of that is a waste, right? It's wonderful to be a nice, decent Jew, right? But if you're only doing it because somebody did it before you, you're only following in the path of somebody else, well, that's not really you. And where do you get your authentic commitments? Okay? So now Simcha Bunim had started out the group on this path that said, yes, the path of the Baal Shem Tov has all this fervor and ecstasy and joy, but that could just be ritual. It could just be things that we do that really aren't from us, that aren't part of our lives. And, so having this very emotional, ecstatic kind of Judaism can make a person blind to other issues, such as maybe what you're doing is not really what you believe in. You're just doing it because it produces this great high for you, right? And that's not real religion, says the Kutzker, right? And even Torah study, right? You can be a great student of Torah and be filled with yourself for having done that, right? And never really become a servant of God in doing that. And so, so one constantly has to be on guard against those kinds of heresies. That's what the Kutzker, I think, would call them. So let's take a look at some particular teachings of the Kutzker. Right? So here is in text number 15. Here's a nice little Devar Torah from the Kutzker. He takes this verse back in Parshat Shmot, which said, and this is the part, after Moses has a child, but he doesn't circumcise the child. And the verse says, the anger of the Lord was kindled b'Moshe, right? B'Moshe can be translated two different ways. The way all the standard translations give is, it means the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, right? Because of what he failed to do in that moment, right? But remember that this is right before Moses goes back to Egypt. And the literal translation is in Moses, within Moses. And that's where the anger of God was kindled. In other words, Moses became angry. And at first, says the Kutzker, Moses refused to go to Pharaoh. But when the anger of the blessed Holy One of Israel's sufferings in Egypt began to be kindled in Moses himself, he went to redeem them. And so it should be, so far as every tzaddik is concerned. Whatever he does on behalf of the community of Israel, he should do because the anger of God burns within him, right? So the Kutzker is, a very angry guy sometimes, right? That compassionate side that was associated with the Baal Shem Tov and with Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, that's not who the Kutzker is. The Kutzker said that anger is also from God, and it has to be directed at things that are unacceptable. You have to be angry about certain things in this world, right? And even at things that are within yourself that are unacceptable. You have to be angry enough about that to weed it out, right? And I've often thought, the paradigm of the American rabbi is much more the kind of person who's a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, somebody who is, loving and caring and good to their members and their congregations, and who strive to have a positive effect on the community. And then once in a while, you run across a rabbi who is really a disciple of the Kutzker, who's really one angry man. Usually it's a man, but occasionally it's a woman now, right? And I can point to some very specific examples of American rabbis who although they may have a loving side, the anger is what moves them. The anger is what brings them to try to change things, right? Now, that anger has a dark side, right? We understand that, if you're not really perceived as that loving and that caring person, it may be more difficult to get where you want to go, right? And it may make it difficult for you to cope with, the role of leadership, right? But the Kutzker said, I'm not going to compromise. I will put God first and not this individual who is, after all, sinful. Let's take God first. And when we fall short, let's be angry about it enough to try to change it. Okay. And he was not interested in outward displays of piety. Okay. Better not to look pious at all. And if you're really concerned about how people think of you and your piety, then better for you not to be so pious. Okay? Now the Kutzker never wrote anything on his own. His teachings are only available to us because of different collections of his teachings or Hasidic teachings in that time that were provided by his students and by other people. And, that's true with many Hasidic thinkers. They didn't like to write down things in books. The Baal Shem Tov certainly didn't, because it's like, what happens between me and you is what really matters. I'm not here for writing this in books for anybody else. I'm here to tell this to you, right? And they didn't think about, well, maybe this will speak to somebody in another generation. They thought, well, this is what I'm saying to you, or to you and you and you. And forget about, writing it down in a book. But other people did write them down. Right? We don't know whether that was just, the way the certain Hasidic rabbis operated, and it was a conscious choice not to write books, or maybe it was just, the thing that was always important to them was the relationship with their followers, and that was all that mattered. Heschel says it's about personalities. Hasidism lives in personalities. Without the charismatic person, there is no teaching of Hasidism. Right? A lot of the Kutzker's teachings are zingers. Okay? They're just, little one-liners that, stuck within the tradition, and people remember them. This is one of the most famous ones. Right? If I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, then I am I and you are you. But if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not I, and you are not you. Karen, you had a question or a comment, and I don't know whether it was before or after we got to this source.
First of all, I'm going to ask you to reread what you just said, but my question was, the anger that you're talking about that these rabbis displayed, was that part of their personality? Is that part of their personality, or the anger just came out about the way Jews were acting?
I think it's both. I mean, personality, sure. For sure, that affects the way in which you come down.
Right. I guess I just wonder why some of these people would have been appointed or been the rabbi if they were.
Because, that model doesn't resonate with most of us. And so, why would anybody follow a rabbi like that? Well, I can tell you that if that rabbi has enough substance and enough charisma, shall we say, to put their point across in a convincing way, then, maybe you don't have to be so nice and loving, because you can be convincing without that. Yes, Daniel.
I'm certainly not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I've spent a lot of time talking to them. And I learned that anger is very, very often not generated by the target of that anger, but is a projection of an anger that the person who's angry has with somebody else or something else.
And that is certainly a relevant comment when it comes to the Kotzker Rebbe, as we shall see farther along. Okay? Yeah. Okay, so Karen asked me to reread this text, number 16 here. Okay? So, if I am I, because I am I, and you are you because you are you, and I am I, and you are you. But if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, and I am not I, and you are not you. In other words, it's about being authentic to yourself. Right? If I decide to keep Shabbos because I see how beautiful it is for Chaim Yankel, and Chaim Yankel's Shabbos is so inspiring. Well, okay, so I'm keeping Shabbos. But am I keeping the Shabbos of Chaim Yankel, or am I keeping a Shabbos that's a Shabbos for me? Okay. Am I only doing it because I admire Chaim Yankel? And maybe I'm not getting it. Yeah, I can learn from other people's example, but do I do it in their way, or do I do it in a way that's true to me, with my own feelings and my own learnings? All right. So I think that's an important aspect of what the Kotzker is getting at here. You have to do it because you are you. Yes, Karen.
Karen,
Sorry,
you have your
I
hand.
meant to lower my hand.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Other comments or questions up to here? Okay. Next. Right? It is possible to bring the dead back to life. Still better is to bring the living back to life. Right? We've already seen the Kotzker was really not that interested in performing miracles, right? He's really a student of Simcha Bunim and the Yehudi in that respect. Okay? You have to figure out how to bring yourself and others into a living Judaism, right? And it can't be, because you are you, right? Imitation, that's not going to do it. You have to define yourself. You have to find your own way, and not just to, do like somebody else did, or for that matter, to do it differently from the way somebody else did, because, you don't think like them, you don't see the world like them, so you're going to do it the opposite way. But that isn't doing it for yourself either. Okay. So all of this is a way to make God real within you, within each individual. Okay. Okay. Next piece. Kotzker says, it is possible to bring the dead back to life. No, I'm sorry, we just read that one. They shall make for me a sanctuary, and I shall dwell among them. Right? We all know this verse. You see it over the ark in Friedman Levitt. Okay. What's the significance of this for the Kotzker? It says this teaches that each person must make a sanctuary inside himself so that the divine presence can dwell there. Right? Because, you have to make a path within yourself to make God real. Right? So sometimes that means you have to clear away certain obstacles, whether they are ego obstacles or maybe things that you speculate about God. The philosophical approach, which was not for the Kotzker at all. Right? The Kotzker says, I believe in the Jewish people, and I believe in the power of Jewish faith, and everyone can achieve that. But you have to work at it. You always have to work at it. By the way, the Kotzker also believed that pursuing wealth was one of those ego obstacles, that, as long as it was voluntary, it was better to be poor. Right? Not that it should be imposed upon anybody, but don't let yourself get sucked up into the pursuit of riches, right? Because that's going to take you off on another ego path. Okay. Comments or questions here? All right. Here is one of my very favorite Hasidic stories told by the Kotzker. And I assume to some degree out of his own experience of leadership. He says, there was once a Jew who had a snuff box made of goat horn. I guess in that time, everybody smoked, right? But a lot of people had snuff boxes, right? Well, this guy lost his snuff box and went around bemoaning his loss. Woe is me. Not only do we live in the darkness of exile, but such a fate to befall me to lose my wonderful snuff box. The holy goat came to him. This holy goat wanders the earth and has horns which reach the heavens and kiss the stars. The goat, seeing the Jew crying, bent down and said to him, cut off a piece of my horn and make yourself a new snuff box. And the Jew cut off a piece of horn, made a new box, put his snuff into it. He was consoled, went to the base medrash, offered the worshipers more snuff, and they took some, and they were full of, such snuff, a taste of paradise. Such a thing has never before existed. And the box is beautiful. Where did you get this snuff box? And so he told them the story of the snuff box and the holy goat, and everybody dashed out of the base medrash in search of the holy goat. The goat, as was its custom, wandered around the world with its long horns, touching the skies, kissing the sun, the moon, and the stars. The crowd caught it and bound it with ropes. The holy goat was good-natured and let everyone take a piece of horn. Everyone took a piece and made a snuff box. Among the Jews, there was joy and gladness. But the holy goat wanders the world without horns. Yes, Daniel.
Okay, this is a great story. I love this story.
I do too.
Does anybody, I have no idea. That goat is obviously a metaphor or a symbol of something. I have no idea what it is. Do you?
I'll take comments on that before I say something. Anybody have an answer to Daniel's question? Who is the holy goat?
A wise person.
A wise person. Shares his wisdom because that's who he is.
Elijah?
But eventually, what happens to the wise person?
He's destroyed. His mission
Can
in
be.
life.
Can be. Yeah.
Or he realized what people thought was so great, he knew maybe wasn't so meaningful. Like they were all searching for something. And
Yeah, I mean, what does the snuff box represent?
Prayer?
No, I don't think so. I think the snuff box is like physical pleasure. It's wealth. It's just, because not everybody has the means to have such a wonderful snuff box, right? But they're all out, they get it for free because the Holy Goat gives it to them. So,
Or they take it from him.
Or they take it from him, right? So it's like, we're depending on you to provide us with wherewithal, right? To, prevent us from, being poor, right? From having to suffer in this world.
or that we need somebody to find a way to make us connect to God or feel pleasure, enjoy the pleasures of God, as opposed to creating that for
And that
themselves.
will bring us to another answer. Yes, Luke.
I'm not sure I completely understand this. I don't like the analogy of the holy goat being a tzaddik or a wise man, because his wisdom would not be diminished by sharing it. I'm not sure what it is, but it's not like, the candle, the primordial candle that lights other candles and the light is spread. In this story, it's a limited amount of horn, and therefore it's not something that is shared with everybody and continues to be shared. So I'm a little confused about that.
Mm-hmm. I'll come back to that. Yes, Daniel.
I'm trying to work through this myself, but it's important that the goat's role was to touch the heavens, to connect the earth and the heavens through the thing that makes him a goat, which is his horns. And that's the exact same thing that for some reason the people rejected, or they wanted it, but they killed the animal, or did they kill the animal? I can't remember. Anyway, they tied up the animal that actually
feels like that a little bit, doesn't it?
Well, it's crazy. The people did. They destroyed what is that? What is that other old tale? They destroyed the goose that gave the golden egg.
The goose that laid the golden egg.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so my own thought on this, and like many parables, it's very rich and subject to multiple interpretations. But knowing what I know about the Kutzker and his life, which I'll share with you more in a little bit, I think this is about the role of the Rebbe, right? Notwithstanding the idea that Luke correctly suggests, which is that, the more you share, the more you have, right? I think that's true up to a point. And the demands on the Rebbe from his followers are, at least in the time of the Kutzker, those demands are immense. People expect the Rebbe to be able to move mountains, at least in the upper world, so to speak, right? To bring down God's healing, to bring down prosperity, to protect them from pogroms, from all sorts of bad things happening. Right? People came to the Rebbe because the Rebbe was the one who was their connection with the upper world. They believed that the Rebbe, and this, of course, is still true in Hasidism today. Hasidim believe that their Rebbe has a firm connection with the upper world. And if they can connect with the Rebbe from below, it's like it completes the circuit, right? And they're able to connect with God as well. And then all good things are possible, right?
I think that's brilliant, Rabbi, and that is it. The old goat is the Rebbe himself. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the goat is the Rebbe. And the problem is everybody wants a piece of the Rebbe. Now, I have known congregational rabbis who were sort of like this too. They never said no. Whatever their congregants needed from them, if it didn't matter if they'd had 2 funerals that day, if somebody had, was in the hospital at midnight in a crisis, they would go because that was what they were there for, right? But, being available like that all the time can be extremely draining. You can lose your horns at a certain point. And I know, because I've seen that happen to some of my colleagues. It's a very difficult balance to be available to everyone and still keep your horns about you. Keep, that which strengthens you and gives you the power to do the things that you do. And by the way, to have a family also and to meet their needs, right? The congregational rabbi, one of the things people don't think about this, but one thing that the rabbi has to be clear to do if they have a family is they have to model being part of a family. They can't allow their work to consume them so much that, they're not there for the kids, they're not there for the spouse. Now, that's not good. That's not Jewish modeling, but it sure happens because, many Hasidim, many congregants think that, they hired this rabbi so that they could have a piece of the horn. And it's not
the
just
same with
ordinary.
executive directors, let me tell you.
Yeah, it can happen to everyone who is part of the system. if the system doesn't function in a healthy way, and no system is 100% healthy, then it can affect a lot of people along the line, executive directors included. But rabbis are the first ones associated. Because, Lou, here's the difference. No one ever thought of the executive director as the symbolic exemplar of the Jewish people or as a stand-in for God, right? That's where the rabbi gets into trouble.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I used to say that people didn't join synagogues because of the executive director. They joined synagogues because of the rabbi. They may leave a synagogue because of an rabbi, but they don't join a synagogue because of the executive director. And I find a parallel, to, an analogy to this in Christian churches, where they seem to have a system, many churches do anyway, they have a system where the head pastor can delegate to volunteers, deacons and so forth, who are looked at by the congregation as an okay person to go to instead of having to go right to the top. But in Judaism, we want to go right to the top.
That's it. And in Hasidism, that is even more powerful. It's in conservative Judaism, let's say, the emotional resonance is exactly the same. It's just not as intense as it is. I mean, I don't know anybody who goes to Rabbi Strauss, let's say, for guidance in every aspect of their life. In Hasidism, that was what you did and do. Yes, Karen.
Oh, I was thinking that it's one thing to get guidance, but to me, the story you read also represents like people wanting the rabbi to give them everything in terms of having, they don't want to, perhaps we don't want to do the work to get this close relationship to God. Maybe we want the rabbi to give it to us so we can save a lot of time and energy as opposed to finding what has meaning for ourselves.
Right. And by the way, that frequently manifests itself in something like this. Rabbi, we need you to inspire us. Okay? It all depends on you. If you will light the fire under us, then we will be Jewish, then we will be observant, and we will be this and that, right? And our children will be Jewish to the 10th generation, amen. Right? It's that kind of thing. But it all starts with the rabbi. And the Kutzker said, that's not so. It starts with the self. The Rebbe is just, a tool with that. Yes, Daniel.
I've heard that some people see their chazan as their personal horns to heaven. They look to the performance of the chazan to make them feel spiritual.
That can happen, particularly for people whose main channel is auditory, right? People who are, very into the music and into how the music can shift your mental state, right? Can literally change your state, can take you into a paranormal state. So for some people, that's true too, right? And by the way, music is very important in Hasidism, and many of the great rabbis were and are today great musicians, okay? And that played a role in their success and their legacy. Some rabbis are not remembered very much for their teachings. They're remembered for their nigun, for their nigunim, for their tunes. Okay? So yeah, that can happen too. Because if that music puts you into the state of mind that makes you receptive to the spiritual world, to the higher world, then, that works too, right? The danger again is that it makes it less dependent on the self, right? Oh, I must go hear the chazan, because otherwise, how will I get into that state of ecstasy, right? So it becomes dependent on somebody else. And that too can be problematic, just as, taking the goat's horns. Now, chazanim can also overdo it, right? How many chazanim? I mean, most chazanim, it is especially true of Cantor Finkelstein. Say, most chazanim today are very good at taking care of their voice. They don't overdo it. They're usually in very good physical and mental condition, and they get good guidance on how to maintain their gift. So, they are less likely than rabbis to lose their horns. Okay, other comments or questions before I add to this story a little bit? Okay, so here's what happened to the Kutzker. Right? In about 1839, the Kutzker apparently had something that we today would probably call a nervous breakdown, right? What happened was that he separated himself from his followers, and he spent the next 9 months basically in private, not seeing anyone, not dealing with any of the affairs of the Hasidim, mostly in bed, okay? Not completely secluded from his followers, but largely, right? And so he remained isolated mostly from his followers for the last 20 years of his life. Okay? What happened? He lost his horns. So, here's the Rebbe on whom all these demands and expectations were placed, and it got to him. It overwhelmed him. So, no more public teaching, no more meeting with most of his Hasidim, no more public life for the Kutzker. And in fact, what happened was that eventually one of his disciples, Mordechai Yosef Leiner, you can see is, the author of the next teachings in this unit, which we won't get to all of this. But Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Leiner, he saw that the Kutzker couldn't function anymore. And so he went off to found his own dynasty. Some people stayed as the Kutzker's Hasidim because they never forgot what the Kutzker was like in his heyday. And they were loyal to his teachings. Leiner said, they need, people need an active Rebbe. Right, yeah, so you're on disability. Fine. We'll give you your disability benefits, but the congregation needs a rabbi, whatever. So I'll be that guy. And he went off to the town of Ishbitz, and he became known as the Ishbitzer Rebbe. He actually did publish his teachings in this book, Mei HaShiloach, the Waters of Shiloach. It's a great title because Shiloach are like the tunnel of water that sustained Jerusalem below the city. Right? So, it's like my teachings are going to sustain my followers. Right? So, here's here's Liner, and many people apparently drift off to follow the Ishbitzer because the Kutzker just doesn't have it in him to be the Rebbe anymore. He is the Rebbe because you don't lose the role of being a Rebbe, but it was always possible for people to switch from one Rebbe to another. And that's what happened with the Kutzker and the Ishbitzer. Right. I want to skip to the 22nd text down here at the bottom. Right? Here's this verse from Parshat Behalotecha. On a sign from the Lord they made camp, and on a sign from the Lord they broke camp. They observed the Lord's mandate at the Lord's bidding through Moses. And here's what the Ishbitzer has to say. Okay? He says, the removal of the cloud and God's dwelling was only observed by Moses. And similarly, in every generation, the tzaddik of the generation sees the will of God. As it is written, the lips of the tzaddik know God's will. It's a creative translation, but okay. The holy Yehudi saw that God's will in his generation was to delay the time of prayer so that it would not be overly fixed, right? And remember, we talked about that last time, that in the early generations of Hasidism, they were much more concerned about the flavor of prayer and the intensity and the ecstasy in prayer than they were about the rules of, doing it by a certain time. Shema has to be said by a certain time. Shemona Esrei has to be done in a certain framework. And it's not as important. What's really important is, how you do it. All right? So it's natural among the Hasidic masters to say, well, the tzaddik knows more. The tzaddik is kind of a parallel to Moses in this respect, where there were certain things that only Moses saw, and everybody else saw them through Moses, right? So, not everybody would go so far as to say that this actually entitles him to act against the rules that prevail in traditional Judaism. The Yehudi would have said, okay, we'll make some exceptions. He wouldn't say, God gave me permission to do this. Okay? But the Ishbitzer says, maybe the tzaddik was right, but the later tzaddik may hear something different from God. And so he's going to go on his path, right? So, God can, have more than one position depending on the time and the vessel for that position. Right? And I think, the Ishbitzer is saying, the Kotzker is in his time, the Rebbe, and now it's my time. And I see some things a little bit differently. And I may see them differently from the way the Yehudi saw them. And I may see them differently from the way the Baal Shem Tov saw them. But that's also part of authenticity, right? Being true to one's own vision of the truth, right? And the Ishbitzer was not as much of an angry man as the Kotzker was. And maybe that was for the best too. Okay. Comments or questions up to here? So now let me leave you with this summary of this, not only this particular school of Hasidic thought, but of all of Hasidism as it has come down to us today. From a book by one of the real scholars of Hasidism in the 20th century, Samuel Dresner, who, by the way, was a congregational rabbi who was much more along the lines of the Kotzker than of the Baal Shem Tov. And I talked about this a little bit when I was a congregation scholar in residence after the publication of my book, talked about the Kotzker and Dresner. And at the Tikkun Leil Shavuot this year, I'm going to talk about how this affected Abraham Joshua Heschel, whose teachings are going to be the focus for our Tikkun this year. And here's what Dresner says. Hasidism has been described as a revival movement. Revival movements do not, as a rule, endure. Not so Hasidism. Emerging in 18th century Eastern Europe, it has continued down to our very day. Even in the most unexpected of places, despite repeated warnings as to its decay and imminent collapse, which is true. Most historians in the 19th and 20th century said Hasidism cannot possibly last for another 100 years. It's got to die out. That's what people said after the Second World War, when so many tens of thousands of Hasidim had been slaughtered. Right? And we know now, of course, that was totally wrong. Right? Fuel was somehow found to stoke the fires from time to time, so that the waves that broke upon the Hasidim could not extinguish the light. Neither the challenge of modern science and thought of the 19th century, nor the communist suppression of the 20th, not even the Nazi onslaught, with its unparalleled destruction of their communities, leaders, and followers, sealed their doom. Hasidism, even though it has many issues today as a very anti-modernist movement, also has some very powerful teachings for us to draw on today. And that is the thing I want to leave everyone with from this class. Yes, Daniel.
So do you care to maybe in a word or a few words, what is it that the Hasidim, what gap in the rest of Judaism, in our Judaism, if you will, is Hasidim fulfilling for people? What is the key?
I think number one, it's a Judaism with faithful joy. Okay, it's a powerful faith, but one that expresses itself in song and dance and ecstasy. ecstasy in prayer, ecstasy even in just, carrying out every simple mitzvah. And that kind of Judaism has something very powerful to say to us. At the same time, I would add that there's the other side as well. There's the side of the Kutzker that says, that once in a while, we need our leaders to just tell us the damn truth. Not to love us, not to, emphasize ecstasy and joy and, all the wonderful things in Judaism, but just to tell us where we're failing as a society, as well as maybe as individuals, and what we need to do to get back on track. So there's the joy and there's also the anger, and both of them are true. Both of them are true, but in our more centrist Judaism, let's say conservative Judaism, we often, become so parv that we don't get either one of those extremes. Yes, Karen.
I'm just wondering what it would take for conservative Judaism to have more of the joy that the Hasidic have. Why don't we have as much of that?
It's a great question. And for the answer to that, I think you have to talk to people like my daughter, who didn't grow up with a prejudice against Hasidism. And let me tell you, most conservative rabbis, if they went to the Jewish Theological Seminary, or for that matter, like Rabbi Rosen, who went to Hebrew Union College, but was always planning to be a conservative rabbi. Those are institutions that until really the 21st century, they were very anti-mystical. Anything that smacked of mysticism, and especially Hasidism, they were against it, heavily against it. I wrote a paper for a conference at Rice on Kabbalah and conservative Judaism. I'm looking for the published volume on my shelf here, and I'm not seeing exactly where it is. But there's, I will tell you a story, if I can remember the exact way it was put, of one of my friends who interviewed with the admissions committee at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And he went there, and for some reason, the conversation veered towards Jewish experience. In other words, how does one get people to feel Jewish, and to love being Jewish? And Robert Gordis, who was a professor of Bible at the seminary, interrupted this student and said, young man, I want you to know that this is an institution that teaches text, right? Right? We need our students to be knowledgeable in Jewish text. Okay, so in other words, what he was saying to him is, let's not get into that level of Jewish experience, right? You just need to learn Gemara. You need to learn Talmud, okay? And that's what it's going to be all about for you.
But isn't there a
Well-
way, isn't there a way to incorporate joy more without it being the way the Hasidic do it? I mean,
Yes,
they
and I
have-
think that, obviously, I think that that can be done. And more of our younger rabbis are working at that and developing ways to do that and to convey that. I think you better ask her rather than me.
Okay.
I can give you a guess, right? Which is a lot more thought about how we do services, right? And how we engage people in services. Because I can tell you in our chapel service, we have certain tunes that people love, and that's fine, right? But there's no one who gives thought to how we bring people into that experience of, making prayer something that's uplifting, right? The goal is to do it and to do it within a certain time period, right? You want to make sure that services are over by a certain time. We make allowances if the Torah reading is longer, but really it just, we got to do it. And that's more important than how we feel about it. And again, the chapel in many ways is a reflection of the synagogues in which many of our worshipers grew up.
It's also a very, very old school male paradigm for life.
Absolutely. Right. So don't try to change that.
But even if you look outside the chapel, even if the service is an upbeat service, what the Hasidic do is they are carrying that through every day, whether they're in services or not.
Right.
That joy is stimulated and it stays with them, and that in and of itself is an important part of their day. And I feel like we don't do that as much.
That's correct. That's correct. So keep thinking about that as we think about, what works for us and what works for our synagogues. So Jennifer, thanks for your help. Thank you everyone for being part of this discussion. And hopefully we will continue something more about this subject in our classes for next year.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Danny.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.